Hello and welcome to another episode of Lumiant Live. I am very excited today. I am joined by Wayne Titus, advisor and managing director at Savant Wealth Management. Hi, Wayne. How are you?
Hey, good, Mark. Good to see you.
So good to see you. The reason I'm so excited is we've been working together for, it's probably 18 months now since we first met.
It's actually over a year.
Yeah, ridiculous. It's gone so quick, but for those that follow the Lumiant news, we've been working with Savant to scale up the Lumiant platform here in the US as our key strategic investor and partner. And as luck would have it, I've been introduced to Wayne as part of that work. And honestly, I'm super grateful to have him as a network of my friends. And Wayne, you've been excellent with how you've led Lumiant at Savant, and it made absolute sense to get you onto this podcast, mate. And I can't wait to unpack and talk about your stories and experiences with Lumiant.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I know the really cool thing about all of this is the collaboration and working with you on a lot of these ideas and implementations. So thanks for that opportunity.
Hey, no worries at all. It's always great to hear ideas, and you guys have a ton of great ones. So, Wayne, before we get into all those great ideas and how you're using Lumiant, how about we start with your story a little bit, just to get people acquainted to the man that is Wayne Titus. Tell us a little bit about your journey through advice and how you got to here today.
Yeah, sure. I'll kind of keep it short because, I've restarted my life probably 3 times in different areas, but I started in sales and sales management. In the automotive and the boat industry. I went back to school after I had my business degree, but I went back to school and picked up an accounting degree, went to work for Ernst & Young, then Coopers & Lybrand. We merged with Price Waterhouse. I was a senior manager in that practice and decided I wasn't really sure how I was providing value to people. And I was in the partner mission process, and I was like, I just wanted to make impact in people's lives. And so I started my own firm. I started a firm that really did tax and accounting work, but I started a wealth management practice. That was really the focus of what I wanted to do. I wanted to integrate tax, financial, and investment strategy for families and small businesses. I started that business in January of 2002. And about 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, I merged that practice with 4 of my other partners with Savant. And we have been working as shareholders in Savant to continue to move the firm forward in its pattern of growth and service to our clients in building ideal futures for our clients. And so that's really the mission of what we're trying to accomplish, is to build ideal futures for our clients and their families.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Wayne. It's such a cool journey for yourself. I never knew you started in the boating industry. I mean, that makes sense given how much sailing you do now.
Yeah, I love it.
That's so cool, man. So let's talk a little bit about that mission at Savant.
Sure.
And we've previously had Brent on before, the CEO, but I'd love to hear it from your perspective, because what we know needs to happen for any firm that uses Lumiant is this connection between their mission and ours, right? And it's certainly what I see at Savant. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you see, I guess, advice being sort of delivered, and why you start using these terms like ideal futures, and how you think about it for yourself personally and at Savant.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a Japanese concept of reason for being. It's called ikigai. And, that was one of the things that I had to do when I was trying to figure out what was I going to do with my life in leaving public accounting and spending time discerning that. What was my reason for being? What was my purpose? And I think as an advice industry, we have to really reflect on that. What is our reason for being? And for us, that reason for being is to impact our clients' lives, to build that ideal future. And so a big part of that is really helping a client identify what is their reason for being, right? To get into those in-depth conversations and to be able to show them that you can make a big impact in that process. And so many clients don't really know where they're going. They just have a general idea of things. We've talked before, typically in the advice industry, when you talk to an advisor, you're developing or designing maybe 3 to 5 goals or 1 to 3 goals. And using the process that we've designed and using the tool that you have, we're identifying 15 to 20 goals just in the initial conversation, right? So that just in and of itself is a major impact to people's thinking. So I think that's the first thing, is to try to figure out how can you make an impact with a client? What process do you need to use, and what tools do you need to use to support that process? And to me, I'm agnostic about the tools. I'm very passionate about ensuring that the tools support the process that we've designed. Because if you've designed a good process, you're going to get good output. And the result and that output is basically the delivery of that ideal future to that client from the discovery that you've done to extract and pull out that information to determine that reason for being. So for me, that it's all about the process and the tools and the depth of discovery.
Yeah, well, there's plenty to unpack there. So a few things that I really resonate with and that I hope our listeners sort of picked up on, but no doubt we'll go into that in a little bit more depth. It's about that linear journey between your purpose, the process you use to deliver your purpose, and the tools you choose to deliver your process. So how about we stay there for a little bit, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
you speak really highly about that. How do you guys, or how do you personally think through that, or how does Savant think through that linear journey?
Yeah, sure. Do you mind if I share some slides with you?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Share some slides. So for those listening on the podcast, you can obviously watch this bit on YouTube, and we'll post it all up over socials as well.
All right. I just need you to share screen sharing, or enable screen sharing.
Done.
Okay, cool.
Hang on, I'll do this now. All participants. Should be good to go, sir.
Perfect. Yes. All right. So I think the first thing is, like, to put it in the context of Savant and how we do this, we identify the 10 key areas. What are the things that we're trying to ensure that we deliver? And certainly there's a lot of other areas that we drive into with clients, but we have the 10 key areas, and that focuses us really on that delivery of the client's ideal future. There's a couple of things that we do in our process. We have to have a good communication process, and we share with the client really that interpretive advisor, what we call, the importance. Really, it's an important area of advisor. You have advisors that are that basically are paternalistic. They tell you what to do. You have advisors that are informative. They give you the information, but expect you to decide. And then there's the interpretive advisor that gathers the information, filters it based on the information that they understand from the client. They review it with the client, and they make recommendations. And so in order to do that, to be that interpretive advisor, you have to gather the content from the client. So you have to have a conversation. You have to put it into your process and analyze those things. So you have 2 or 3 or 5 recommendations, and which one might be the best recommendation given the circumstances that you heard from the client. And then you have to, validate that with the client. They decide, is that what they want to pursue? Is that a valid recommendation based on what they're trying to accomplish in their ideal future? And then you become the implementation manager. So you manage the implementation and the monitoring of things until there's new content. So it circles back around. And so it's an iterative process, and it's kind of a process that kind of moves forward in a spiral, right? Because you're always revisiting these things. When you have that initial conversation and you're gathering that content, the important thing is to understand as an advisor and to demonstrate to the client, this may be the first time that they're actually crystallizing some of these goals or these ideas. And things change over time. Your priorities change as you age. Maybe you accomplish things and you revisit other goals that you never thought you might be able to accomplish. But those are things that you have to kind of revisit over time. It's not going to happen. It's not a once and done conversation. So it's something that you need to keep track of and monitor over that period of time. And you need a tool to be able to do that. When we do that, we put it kind of into the context of well-being. So, this would look familiar to people that are familiar with the Lumiant tool. The your life portion, which is basically the well-being portion, the 8 dimensions of well-being down here, right? The way I feel about it is, if you're doing something well and it's important to you, you probably don't feel much stress in that. But if you assign importance in a particular area and you don't feel like you're accomplishing it well, then there's probably some stress, strain in a relationship, or maybe even anxiety about that area. So we want to identify what are these areas, these sore spots, right? These hot spots, and identify those, and then begin to unpack the information around there. And as we do that, we're also then pulling together these 16 value cards and asking clients specifically what is important to you about that value. So when they go through that value selection and we guide them through that conversation, one spouse is picking the top 5, the other spouse is picking their top 5, and then we're combining them into a household top 5 values. Then we're drilling down on those. It's not that we forget about the ones that weren't included in the top 5. It's just that we're going to focus on the top 5 first, right? And then from that, when we find out what's important, then we start to say, okay, specifically, is there anything else related to that that's important? What are the other things in that area that might be important to you? And try to branch out and begin to identify specific goals. So, what would, related to that goal, what would make you feel good about progress in the next 90 days? What would you need to do and accomplish? And so then beginning to identify maybe some next steps. So it's drilling down actually from some of the at the goal level to specific things that they may need to accomplish themselves, or maybe we start to identify the strategies that we might need to implement as it relates to the 10 key areas. And then those strategies have underlying tactics. We use Salesforce as a tool. And so when we kick off cases, those are specific strategies or tactics that we're kicking off to pursue. And then that leads to, in essence, that implementation of the ideal future for that client. So we tie it in basically from well-being through values and goals, identifying which strategies to to implement, and then those strategies have linked specific tactics leading to your ideal future. Most of the industry starts here. They just say, okay, what are your goals? And that's where you get the 1 to 3. Well, based on that, they're going to implement certain strategies, and they might have tactics to go along with that. But again, if you don't have this basis of information, you're really potentially, losing a good part of that conversation.
Wayne, that's epic, to say the least. What I've enjoyed watching through Savant, working through Lumiant, is your ability to apply principles and beliefs that you've held already as a company or as an advisor to what it is that Lumiant does. So one of those principles or beliefs I really enjoy that you just spoke about, and I want to understand how you came to this, is that interpretive advisor approach, because it does really sing to what we believe here at Lumiant, that whole consultative process, engaging the disengaged, empowering them to decide backed by your expertise. But it is a bit of a step away from the financial advice models in the past, which is you pay me to be the expert, therefore here's my best ideas, therefore just do. How did you determine the type of advisor style you guys wanted to be, or through that process? Because you mentioned a couple others, right? You could be paternalistic, which is probably the old school method. Like, how did you get to know that you wanted to be interpretive?
Well, when you think about relationships, a lot of firms really, they talk about wanting to have relationships with a client, but honestly, you don't have that unless you have the depth of understanding with a client. I love the word solidarity. I use that word a lot, and to me, that is when you're in solidarity with somebody in relationship, you're walking with them through the process, right? And that process is the process of life, for us. And so to give good advice, to be effective, you really have to spend the time understanding the client and what's important to them. And it takes time to do that. It's not about efficiency. I don't think you or I or many other people would describe the importance of being efficient with relationships, right? You think about that. I'm not going to be efficient in my relationship with my spouse, right? I want to be effective in the relationship with a spouse. So how is that different? Well, effectiveness is it really turns on the ability to communicate and drive to deeper detail. Atul Gawande is a great author. I love a lot of what he's written. The Checklist Manifesto. The thought of interpretive advisor to me comes from the same thought that he provided on the effectiveness of being an interpretive physician, right? And not being a paternalistic physician or an informative physician that just dumps stuff on your desk. Trying to understand your life, what's important to you, and then helping you through that process, walking in solidarity in that relationship. He also talks about this idea of aptitude. It's really not a word, right? When you're inept, you are misapplying your aptitude. Your aptitude is your education in a particular field. So you can have a very high level of aptitude, but if you misapply it, you're considered to be inept, right? So we have to look at ourselves, I think, as professionals and say, how can we increase our aptitude, which is the application of our aptitude? How can we be better advisors? And I think that process really turns very heavily on communication with your client and building that relationship, that deeper understanding of what's important to them. And then you can bridge to the solutions and things like that and getting them towards their ideal future. So I think it's really for us as Savant, it's understanding what's important to us about serving a client.
Yeah, it's such a great philosophy on relationships. I know you can speak about relationships for hours, but what I love about your view there is that aspect of solidarity, doing stuff with, to keep challenging old methods and old models that, still exist and may still work for some people. But when you started going down that path, or maybe you were always going down that path, did you find clients were a bit like, oh, why are you doing this with me as opposed to just doing this for me? Like, how did you sort of observe the change in your client relationships when you made that conscious choice to be a solidarity partner?
Yeah. Well, I think that, the important thing is you cannot, for me personally, and for Savant, you cannot affect a client and their family unless you serve them for a long period of time, right? This is a process. And so first off, helping refocus the client on the fact that it's not specifically about performance. Everybody's going to have some kind of performance, and everybody's going to have good performance and bad performance. It's not about performance. It's about whether or not the movement through these things is going to get you where you want to go, whether it's positive performance today or negative performance today, right? So shifting the conversation is an important aspect of that and helping clients understand that. I think, proving that you're invaluable to your client is the next thing, because if you can't have a long-term relationship, you haven't really proved your value to the client. So they have to see that value. There's a quote I want to just toss out there. The CEO for Zorro, Zauro, his last name is Sue. He says that your company and customer experience is either I can't read my writing here. It's either dispensable or indispensable. Like a client, the client's either going to say, yeah, it's valuable to me, then it's indispensable, or it's not of value to me, and then they're going to potentially change the relationship. We recognize we cannot make major impacts and serve 1 million clients, 1 million client families, unless we can demonstrate our value and be indispensable to those clients. And the only way we can do that is to demonstrate the depth to which we really understand what they're trying to accomplish and help them recognize that. Then you become indispensable in that process.
Yeah. It's very black and white at the end of the day, isn't it? Are you dispensable? Are you indispensable? What role do you want to play? Now, you could argue definitions of those till the cows come home. But to your point, show me depth of relationship, and then you don't need to argue.
Right. The focus is on something completely different. It's really on their future. You've taken their mind off of the here and now, which is what most of the industry is focused on, and lifting their eyes out to the horizon about where are they going, and is that the direction they truly want to move?
Yeah, absolutely.
Together with each other as spouses potentially in relationship, or as advisor clients in relationship, is that the direction that they want?
Yeah. Look, I know you've prepped a bit of a client case study, which I think is one that we'll get to in a moment. But before we do that, there is one word you consistently use that I'd love to go into depth with you on, which is process. And through working with you for so long, you know, I've watched you interpret Lumiant, interpret Savant, and build and define process for people to follow, which I think is super admirable. I'd love to know your method or how you think through process, because, you know, the screens that people can see on the YouTube that you've used is a reflection of you thinking through process. So why is that so important to you is the question. And when you first started looking at Lumiant, how did you come up with the process that you're now coaching a ton of other advisors on?
Yeah, I think, you know, in our firm, our legacy firm, as well as with Savant, a great deal of thought has gone into process, right? And the only way you can build an effective process is to know where you're going, right? There's a famous quote, I think, by Yogi Berra talking about, you know, getting to know where you're going, or you have to know where you're going in order to get there, right? And the importance about that is you have to have that vision of what you're setting out to do. And then you have to figure out how you're going to build a bridge to get from where you are to where you want to go. It's a pretty easy process on the surface. But as you're implementing that, what you're really trying to do is then focus on, between each step, is trying to circle back and say, okay, what could go wrong in that process? And how can we ensure that we put something in place to move things forward without falling through the cracks? So I'll call the what could go wrong is something falls through the cracks, right? So we want to make sure that we're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's in the process, and that we're not missing any punctuation in that sentence, right? To get from here to there. And so really at a base level, that's really what it's all about, is knowing where you're going, where you want to go, and then building that bridge to get you there. But having that bridge and how that process works is impactful for the firm and for the clients. If it's a process where the client has to do a lot of work and there's a lot of friction in that process, you haven't really solved the client's problem. They're, you know, one of the reasons why they're talking with you is they don't know necessarily how to get from here to there. And if you're giving them a lot of homework, you know, they need to have some homework. They need to get involved and engaged in some of these conversations. But you want to build a process that's efficient, effective, you know, and delivers what they're looking for. And so you have to spend some time reworking that process so that you're building those efficiencies into the process, not into the relationship. Because as I said, you want an effective relationship with communication, but revisiting those steps. Is that really necessary? Can we do it differently? Or can I make the change and then validate it with the client? So if you remember back to the communication process that I put out there, we can make assumptions, and we can say, based on what we heard you say, this is what we would recommend. But I want, before we go down that pathway, I want to make sure that I heard you right. So revisiting with a client, they have some responsibility in this relationship. It is to make decisions. There's only two responsibilities they have: to give you information and to make decisions. And as advisors, there's really only two that I have. It's to analyze things, to listen and analyze things, to present you know, recommendations with that, and then to monitor, to implement and monitor until there's new information that comes back through that feedback loop. So I think if you're doing that and setting up your process and you're revisiting and refining your process as you identify issues. We always had kind of an issue identification process, and we tried to say, is this a process issue or is this a training issue? Because if it's a process issue, that's something that I can fix by tweaking a piece of software or by updating something internally. Whereas if it's a training issue, I might not have helped a junior advisor think about it in a particular, think about that issue in a particular way, and they may need some training. Or they may need to just follow the process. Maybe they're going outside the process and they're going to miss something. So it's really, I think, making sure that you're reviewing that feedback loop and identifying any issues. And then I'm trying to understand what the root cause of those issues are. Is it a process issue? Is it a training issue? And then coming up with solutions. So you're constantly, tweaking this thought of continuous improvement in process and in delivery of service, and reducing friction for the client increases the value of what you're providing that client.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. It's process is often overlooked, I feel, and your way of describing it is really simple and easy to understand, which I think is great, because it's really foundational and fundamental to any performance, whether it be sporting, whether it be business, whatever. Right, everyone's got a process, even creative, right?
Right. If you're going to build quality, right? This is a way to build quality into that process. Well, what is quality in this case? It's identification of the appropriate goals and objectives and implementation of the appropriate strategies and tasks that you need to accomplish that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Well, Wayne, let's talk about some of the experiences you've had, right? With using Lumiant. We've loved hearing a lot about your philosophy and how you've interpreted it for your own experience and therefore Savant's experience. But you've been one of our massive users of Lumiant since adopting it, and you mentioned, I still think you have our personal best of like most goals in a conversation, something like 26 off the top of my head, from memory. I think that's excellent. So we won't go into that story today, but you've brought a really interesting one in that I'd love for you to talk about, a client experience that maybe wasn't the most linear that you've had before. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that client experience?
Yeah, sure. And I think this actually touches upon a lot of advisors' fears in implementing a conversation like this, because it may seem a little bit touchy-feely, right? When you start talking about well-being and the social science behind well-being, it ties into the social science of happiness. Why are we happy? Again, if it's something that's important and we're accomplishing it well, we're going to be happy. If it's something that's important and we're not accomplishing it well, or we feel that we're not accomplishing it well, we're not going to be as happy, or we could actually be on the other end of the spectrum. We could be sad or depressed about it. And so the idea is to make sure that we're building and identifying those things at the base level. Well, a lot of people aren't going to see, if you just come at them and say, I'm going to give you a survey, I want you to answer these questions, and then we'll talk about it. This is something that what we found is very ineffective with clients, because when they start to review these questions, the financial spouse typically is making the call to talk with you about investing and about returns. That's what they have in their mind as what an advisor is for, because that's what the marketplace tells them. Our culture has built that story in their minds for decades. And what we need to do is we need to begin to knock down and break that mold by helping them understand why we're talking about what we're talking about, to put it into context of why it's important to them. And so I'll just give you a quick example. We had a client that came in. I had sent an email message to he and his spouse. He was the financial spouse. She was the non-financial spouse, not really interested in these kinds of things. And she filled these survey questions out and was actually quite excited about the questions that we asked. And he called me and said, hey, why are you asking me these questions? My first reaction was, we talked about this on the phone. I sent you an email outlining this, but let's talk about it again. I didn't say that, but the idea is, even when you tell people this, they may not hear you Adults learn differently than kids. Kids are sponges. They soak it up right away and they implement. Adults have to hear things 2 or 3 times. So you have to take every opportunity to share with them why you're asking for this information, or you're going to receive a survey. That survey is on well-being. It's going to feel like a bit of social science, and it is. And it's because we need to gather information at this base level in order to project into what strategies and tactics eventually to use when we finalize what your initial goals are that we're going to pursue towards your ideal future. And they need to hear that 2 or 3 times sometimes to get over the hump on that. So there's some pushback, I think, to the conversation about well-being and values. And we bundle those 2 surveys together when we send them out. And we send them in one email with links for each spouse. If there's 2 spouses, and if it's 1 spouse, obviously only 1 link. But the idea is to make it efficient and effective for them, but to make sure that you're demonstrating upfront how you're linking it in. So I go back to this one slide, and if I have the opportunity up front to share this slide with them, that's what I do, because I want to put it in the context of there's 2 pieces: the piece about your life and that well-being, and how that folds into these 16 value cards. They're not necessarily, your values. We're saying which ones of these are most important to you based on how you feel. And then we're going to get into a deeper conversation about what about those is important. I think the important aspect is also to say, we're not judging values. We're not judging well-being. We're trying to do is gather information. What is important about that value to you drives a lot more information than why is that value important to you? When you ask why, that's kind of like a judgmental question. And you can set some people off. If they feel judged, that they're going to be judged, they're not going to necessarily share information. And so you need to be very clear what about that value is important to you. And that specifically will help us begin to identify the goals that are truly important to you. And having that conversation, then we can have, design more specific strategies, a truly personalized strategy to support your goals towards your ideal future. And so that's what we did. And that client was actually turned right around and said, I see why you're doing this. I completely understand. And the conversation that we had after that was amazing. The non-financial spouse was more engaged than he had ever seen her engaged in any of the past relationships that he had had with advisors. I love to say at the beginning, this is probably not something you're going to see from a lot of other advisors, because they're going to talk mostly about strategy and performance and things like that. But for us to be able to deliver what we are doing, which is delivering your ideal future, we have to have this conversation. It's part of our process.
So if I play out the timeline of events here, which I love, I always really like these turnaround stories. Client wants to meet with you, so you have a call and say, hey, super important survey is about to come out, helps me understand what's most important to you from a well-being and values perspective. You send the surveys out. Non-financial spouse, who's never really been engaged, goes, excellent, this speaking my language, I love it, I'm involved. Financial spouse picks up the phone and goes, wait, this is weird. Like, why is this the case? And on that phone call, you reiterate why you're doing it and how it links to their ideal future and how you believe this is going to be super important for you to advise them to the best of your ability. And he comes around and goes, yeah, I'll do it. And then they turn up to the meeting. In that meeting, did you have to reiterate it again, or was he ready to go and it was all good?
He was really pretty ready to go. I think he was still struggling with some of those things. Again, as adult learners, we need to hear it 2 or 3 times. So I go back to this slide and I go through that process. Now that you've, gone through that survey process, what did you think? Do you have any questions on why we asked what we did? I welcome those questions, because if they have questions, I need to know that they still are maybe on the fence. before we get into that conversation, I have another opportunity to really pin this down for them and make sure that they understand why we're doing what we're doing and why it's so important in this process. They don't really know what your process is. So by sharing this with them and reiterating it, you're building that confidence, again, that our process crosses all the T's and dots all the I's, and we're not going to let anything fall through the cracks. It's really important to have this conversation.
Right. And when you're in that, you mentioned that he had never really seen her engaged in this before. Did he make any comment to that, or what did you see in their dynamic that sort of showed that?
Well, typically in this process, the non-financial spouse goes first when we dive into, the values, furthering the values conversation and documenting that and asking what about that value is important to you. And he had heard some things from her that he had never heard before. They didn't ever have these conversations. In fact, it was interesting because, she had some things that she wanted to do that were important to her. He had some things that were really important to him, but he hadn't verbalized to her. And so, many times you're in a room, or I do most of my meetings by Zoom, so I'm not physically in front of the client. Incidentally, that's why I love this technology and the way it works, because it works very easily in a meeting like that. And for somebody to say you can't have a relationship with somebody over Zoom, when you're talking about this important stuff, you're building that relationship. And that's what's most important. But they began to recognize in each other that there were things that were important. So when we got down to, consolidating to the top 5 household values, normally the financial spouse is driving that conversation, and they're the ones that are making the decisions about what's important to the household. But when you're in that kind of a forum, everything's out on the table and you're having that conversation. It's interesting to just kind of sit back, and they actually went through the process and, picked from their top 5 values each into the top 5 household values, and they prioritize them really with no direction from me. I basically start off that conversation saying, now we have these values, we have to consolidate them to the top 5 household values. And there's actually, in some cases, in this specific case, there was a negotiation. Well, this is what I heard was really important to you. And the other person would say, well, this I heard was important to you. That's got to be in there somewhere. And they're working as a household, as a team, to try to identify what are the first 5 things that we're going to really work on. And that's just a beautiful thing to watch. And you're making yourself indispensable in that relationship.
How good is that narrative arc, going from I don't want to do this and non-financial spouse super engaged to tell me more about it, Wayne, to getting involved, to running it themselves. How good is that? How did that make you feel as the advisor?
Well, for me, what it does is it really cements my ability to affect the outcome for this family. There's studies out there that show 70% of non-financial spouses leave their advisor when the financial spouse dies or they get divorced. Why is that? Because the non-financial spouse is not engaged with the advisor. They don't have the opportunity, they don't have the interest, because they haven't demonstrated to the non-financial spouse why it's important to be engaged, because they're not asking for this information, what is important to the non-financial spouse. And so they're going to seek that elsewhere. So for me, when I see that in this kind of a meeting, that cements it for me. I know by engaging both spouses, I have a client for a very long time, if not for their life. That's when I can make the most impact for them and their families.
Yeah. What a great reflection, Wayne. At the end of that experience, how did the clients feel? In particular, the financial spouse, did they make any remark to you?
I actually asked people when I'm finished with that, so what did you think about our process? I'd love to get some feedback. And I constantly get the feedback, this is not at all what I expected. When I, especially if it's with a new prospect, We're going back through and actually doing this with existing clients now, kind of like this rediscovery process. But for new prospects that have never worked with us before, they're blown away. Never talked to anybody about this kind of stuff before. For existing clients, the feedback that I've gotten is, well, you were doing some of this anyway, but this really demonstrates to me that we're making sure that we're catching everything, right? We're revisiting and making sure that we've identified all those opportunities. And so it gives us an opportunity to go back and just kind of re-cement that relationship. So I think in both cases, people are very surprised by the process, pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. Well, Wayne, thank you so much for sharing all your best practice today, the way you think through things. We've gone through a ton. We've gone through your view around ideal futures, how you thread a process through that to make sure that, you know, it's repeatable. You've talked about the different communication styles between paternalistic advisors and interpretive advisors, your view around being efficient versus effective. And you know, one of the ones that will definitely make a social bite, I think, is your interpretation of your responsibilities and the client's responsibilities, right? The client has two responsibilities: to give you information and decide what to do. You as the advisor have two responsibilities: listen and analyze their information and ask great questions, and then implement and monitor their situation for any new information. And then your client story is fantastic. One of the ones that I always love to hear, where, you know, it's new, you have to explain the well-being, the social science behind it, and you have to have that passion behind it, because as you got, the CFO the chief financial officer, or the financial spouse might challenge you, as he did, say, why the hell are we doing this? But you stuck to your guns. But what I really admire in that process is your constant check-in on feedback, you know, at the start of that meeting. You know, how did you find the experience? Because every time you're listening for an opportunity to help them embed their own skills and their own understanding of why this is important, because you understand the impact of that. And then at the end, you ask them what they think of the process, and, you know, you're quite often getting job well done. So Wayne, I think you've shared a ton of wisdom already. If I could ask you for one extra tip, we always get our advisors that use Lumiant to share one tip if they were speaking to their peers in the industry about, you know, that might be considering going down this path, a values-based advice path, or a well-being or human-focused path. What might that one tip you give them be?
Well, I think you have to focus on ikigai. What is your reason for being, and helping discover that for the client. What is their reason for being? What's truly important for them? And then finding that connection of how you can help get them from here to there. And if you don't know how to do that, I think the best thing to do is to read up on, you know, what it means to provide value-based advice, and understanding that it's all about the impact of things. So if you want to be impactful and deliver impact, you have to plan for that. It doesn't just happen by happenstance. And so you have to educate yourself and read. So as you said, Mark, you know, ask for feedback. Can I get better based on what the client's telling me? Did I say it the right way? Did they interpret it the way I meant it? Or can I clarify that? Can I learn from that and carry that forward? So I'd say, you know, read up, determine how you can make impact, and then, you know, for yourself, just continue to hone that saw.
You got one or two favorite things to read up?
Oh gosh. Well, I'm just finishing a book now called Time's Up, and it's about implementing a values-based subscription model, you know, in business. And there's a lot of information in that book. It's a fantastic book. Anything by Vern Harnish or Gino Wickman on scaling your business and connecting your mission with what's important to your clients.
Wayne, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for sharing all that great best practice. I'm sure the Lumiant Live community will absolutely appreciate it. I certainly do. Thanks again for joining me on the podcast today.
Hey, Marcus, my absolute pleasure to be here, and thanks so much.